and I knew something bad could be happening. And then I just waited, and I thought, well, the machine is going to tell me if it's bad. And sure enough, about 10 seconds later, this bang, 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 bang goes off. To be straight and honest about it, I think it was the glamour of my father being a Royal Air Force pilot flying jets, and then watching the Apollo 11 moon landing. I was in Malta at the time. My father was based there. I was about 11 years old. And that was so exciting for me. My mother had been giving me science fiction books from about the age of 10. And together that made me say, space is it. But then, as I realized that I wanted to do this and I had to figure out how to do it, I was disappointed in not being able to join the Royal Air Force. I won't go there. It was to do with how I took the eyesight test when I was 15. So I focused on becoming a scientist astronaut. That was the way I wanted to get into space. And I became an experimental physicist at Cambridge University, Queen's College, Cambridge. I got a first in physics and natural sciences, and then did the PhD in 3 years' time, which is pretty fast, knowing that that was the ticket I needed to become an astronaut. And at that time, the Space Shuttle program was announced and coming into my consciousness, and I started to really target that as the program I wanted to join. There were European astronauts being selected to fly on the Space Shuttle in that time frame. And I spoke to one candidate who was a professor in Cambridge of the British Antarctic Survey, and I was helped by him in developing my CV, my resume as we call it in America. I should say, after I got to NASA and banged on the door and said, can I be an astronaut? And they said, well, you need a bit more experience. I began to realize that my actual day-to-day reasons for wanting to be an astronaut were more relevant to everyday endeavor. That is, working in a big team, working on something that other people really value, going somewhere where people care about what happens. When I was finally selected as an astronaut, it was on my third try, and I've been rejected twice in 2 previous selections beforehand. Got to the last 100. But then was told I didn't make it. I was selected in my third try when I was 30 years old, and there we had to write an essay about why you want to be an astronaut, and I'd written thousands of words in the previous ones about it's the destiny of humankind. It'll protect us when we meet the aliens. It'll help us survive the asteroid impact. All those sorts of things. But those didn't really register with the astronaut selection board. What really registered was after the Challenger accident. This was a space shuttle that took off, blew up after 70 seconds and killed 7 crew, including the first teacher in space. And it was right after that accident that I made my application. And I just said, I like being part of a team that's trying to do something big and important that we all value. And it was that maturity, I think, and also the fact that I've been working in the space program for a bit as an operations person, someone who got the experiments together to go onto the space shuttle and to be deployed into space. I said, I like being part of that team. I like working on these details about how to make a high-performing system work and be part of that team. And lo and behold, I was selected. So it's really, to summarize it, it's a hard, I wanted to solve hard problems that have real consequences if you do it wrong, and be part of a big, mission team that's bigger than me. So on the Mir, I was living with 2 Russians. They didn't speak English. So the first point you have to deal with when you're living in space for a long time, unlike those short missions, is you don't know what's coming the next week. You are not prepared for it. You've got general skills, you've got general scientific knowledge about the experiments you're doing, you've got general knowledge about the systems you need to repair, but you don't know what's coming the next week. And you don't know what's going to need to be repaired the next week. And so the big key to living a long time in space, and this was emphasized on my space station flight. So last flight, I did a repair of the Hubble telescope in between. But my last flight, I was launched on a Russian Soyuz rocket to the International Space Station. And I was the commander of one person, a Russian. And we only spoke Russian. I'd learned Russian well on the Mir. And there, we were a maintenance crew, the janitors, you know. It was right after the second space shuttle accident, Columbia, and the space shuttle was grounded. No more big American crews could come up and do all these construction activities that were going on the ISS. Instead, I was launched on this Russian rocket with Alexander Kalery, I call him Sasha, to live for 6 months. And so that's where it adds up to a year in orbit. And that year in orbit was all about making sure I got along with Sasha. Even though I'm the commander, we have to get along for half a year in space. So that was the first thing, respecting your crew members. We did have a visiting crew a couple of times. And then working well with the ground teams who are going home on the weekends, they've got their families to visit, etc. But you're in space on your own. And we now have to, Sasha and I have to, he has to maintain most of the Russian parts of the station. I have to maintain all of the European, American, and Japanese parts of and Canadian parts of the space station. But it was mostly maintenance. There were experiments, but I would say 70 to 80% of my time on the International Space Station in that time frame was maintenance, and about 20% were experiments. So there was psychological fatigue. Sometimes you lost focus. We had a leak, a slow progressive leak that took me a week to try and figure out where it was. The ground teams, as I say, they go home on the weekends. I had failures of our comms on a Friday evening. And I know if I don't get these comms sorted out, I'm going to have to write down about 500 words or 1,000 words of instructions on Monday morning. So that's the sort of thing where I now have to go off and try and solve that comms problem without the team on the ground because they've gone home. And then they got all angry with me on the Monday morning because I didn't, I went ahead and fixed it. So anyway, it can be frustrating, but it's like, I describe it to another astronaut friend of mine as the missions on the space shuttle are deployment missions. They're rapid missions you've been trained. Going to the International Space Station, going to Mars, going to the moon, they're like going in a motorhome, in an RV that keeps breaking down. And you have to deal with those problems as they come along. And you need resilience in your attitude, confidence in your colleagues, in your crew that are with you, and you need persistence. And basically, I think you have to be fairly optimistic because otherwise it will get you down. Risk in general is really in the general public's view of spaceflight misunderstood. They think of risk as an explosion, and that's what it comes down to. That's why people that's why people are scared when they come to watch you launch. That's why you're scared when you get to launch, is that you're thinking of the big explosion, the one big event. But most of the risk is a slow drift away from what you know is right to what is convenient now and you don't think is really wrong. So it's the biggest risk is deviation from normal operations. And I think we use the word drift or normalization of deviance. And what that means is that slowly in risk, and I know a lot about risk mitigation, there's almost always, even in the big blow-ups, there's a series of smaller events that have all occurred, and the chance of each is quite small. And so the chance of all of them, if you multiply the probabilities, is even smaller. But nonetheless, it's not zero. And it's this thing called the accident chain. And as you drift away from your originally planned, verified operational procedures, you start to increase the risk in each of those chain links, until eventually an accident happens. And the most common form of risk is where the human and the machine working together, like think pilot in a cockpit, start to deviate from what was originally planned. And you get small anomalies starting to accumulate. Probably the Mir space station was the best example of this, where because it was aging rather badly, some people age well. Some machines age well if they're maintained. You can fly airliners that are 50 years old if they're maintained and you haven't moved away from the original intention of how they were designed to be flown. But if you get this drift away from normal operations, and you keep adding on systems that haven't been, we use the word integration in the space industry, haven't been properly integrated into the system, you get this normalization of deviance. And the Mir had that happening. And I think the best example of it was the collision that happened to us. Because there on the ground, mission managers who wanted to make money, actually save money, they wanted to stop paying Ukraine $2 million per radar box that was being used to allow the cargo ships to come into the Mir. They wanted to save that money. But why did they have the radar? So they didn't want to buy the radar box. They had decided they needed the radar box 30 years before that, older men, because they knew they needed the radar to slow it down so it could come into the space station safely. But at this point, when I was on the Mir, the managers had decided that maybe we can do away with that. And we'll have the crew take the place of the radar box, but without a radar. And that led to the I have to defend my crew here. My crew were told to try and measure the distance in place of the radar, looking at graph paper, looking at the TV screen and drawing lines on the screen and seeing how big the space station Mir looked, and then go to a table and figure out what the distance was. But all this happens in a matter of seconds, so they couldn't keep up. And this vehicle hit us. So the decision to make that was the deviance from what the Russians had originally designed a good system, and it worked well. But then they deviated from it progressively. And because they didn't want to pay for the machine, they started to turn off the machine or not use the machine. And so that was a very good example of how drift and normalization of deviance leads to a catastrophic event. It didn't kill us, but it was a very serious event for the Russian program. Training of your personnel and your machines, because in the end we're going to get to the discussion about can machines do these tasks with AI. Training of your machine, training of your personnel is essential for handling unexpected events. It's essential for handling, of course, expected events, and you know how to verify that and check it. But it's the unexpected events that really test your human or your AI. And in our case, similar catastrophic event training that we had done on Earth in vacuum chambers where there was a leak of our space station in a real chamber, vacuum chamber, helped me in particular calm down when the initial crunch and crash happened. And so for the first few seconds, I thought, well, are we going to die? But it was an academic thought sort of thing, a dispassionate thought. There was a little bit of adrenaline floating. And then I thought, how serious is this? So immediately I was trying to assess the state of the station, even after the crunch had happened. And I knew something bad could be happening. And then I just waited. And I thought, well, the machine is going to tell me if it's bad. And sure enough, about 10 seconds later, this bang, 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 bang goes off. And it's the alarm. It's a very simple thing. It's not AI. It's just a pressure alarm saying your pressure's falling. And then to back that up, my ears started popping. So as my ears popped, that was a good sign. Because for me, as I was floating through to the Soyuz lifeboat spacecraft, because one of the crew members had told me to do that, to get it ready to bail out, to leave. As I was floating through, I couldn't feel the crunch because I was floating. I was weightless. I initially expected the whole station to come apart, so just crack. And I was waiting just to see the black of space, through the hull, because the hull's only 3 millimeters thick of aluminium. And but then the crunch, that was when the crunch happened. So then a few seconds went through, and then the alarms went off. My ears are popping. I thought, this is good. I actually thought this is good. I'd already assessed the situation. And the reason why I thought it was good, because I knew the leak rate wasn't impossible. If it was an opening space station, I would just breathe out like a scuba diver does as they come up to the surface. Try not to pop my lungs, but after that, you've got no air to breathe, so you might as well pop your lungs. And that hadn't happened. So I immediately thought, things are better. We can start assessing. So my next thought was, we're going to follow the procedures like we'd been through on Earth to figure out where the leak was. And then, of course, things started to go wrong because the crew weren't following the leak procedure, and the ground had jumped in and said, you will not follow the leak procedure, stay at your post. And it all turned into a dead space station with a module cut off successfully by myself and Alexander Lazutkin, also a Sasha. And then recovery over 30 hours or so of trying to use the Soyuz spacecraft to spin it. So the real emergency was those first 10 seconds or so, and it was to assess the situation. As soon as I realized it wasn't death in the next 10 seconds, I was thinking a bit like in Life of Brian, in Monty Python, oh, things are looking up, Then it was start focusing on what you can do to triage this event so that it doesn't get worse. And then it was a long, long process of trying to persuade my crew to do the recovery of the station using the Soyuz, because that was our lifeboat, and our commander, Vasily, didn't want to use the lifeboat's fuel to try and save the space station that way. I never considered myself a great leader. I think I am considered a good leader, but I never thought of myself as a leader because I wasn't military. I hadn't been through the military, people shouting at you and you shouting at people. So I didn't know if I was a good leader or not. And I was asked to create a leadership program for NASA for the International Space Station crews, because they knew that with men, women, different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, all working together in space, we could easily have a falling out amongst the crews. So I was asked to come up with a common leadership program. And the one we settled on was just outdoor leadership. In the UK, there was the Duke of Edinburgh system, there's Outward Bound. I tried the Outward Bound as I was evaluating these courses, and I ended up with one similar. It's called the National Outdoor Leadership School in the US. But the whole point of it was to take your group and emphasize not the leader, but the followers. And so I'm going to turn your question around. The leadership lesson is to use your followers, and for the followers to be good followers so that they can be a leader at some point. And so in these exercises, we'd assign a leader. And in the International Space Station, and often in companies, there are some political reasons for assigning a leader. And you can't really go around them. There are other, there are external factors driving the person's appointment as leader. But within the team, you're good followers, and that was maybe a political decision. So you just help the leader. The follower is the key to saying, Mike, how are you feeling today? You look a bit, did you sleep okay? Always ask someone how they slept in a team. So I would always ask Sasha on the ISS, when I float in, I say, Sasha, how did you sleep? And he'd say, not so well that night. And then he'd ask me, how did you sleep? And it's kind of a formal exchange. Well, I slept pretty well. And then we get on. But then you already know, as followers and leaders, what your state is. And on the ISS, it was incredibly important to know, to respect what your followers do. And they are the leaders in what they're doing because they're doing it and they're the expert. The person closest to problem or to a maintenance task is the leader of that task, and respect that as the leader. And your job as the commander is often to make sure that the right person is going for the right problem. And in my case on the ISS, with a Russian control center and an American one, and was to keep the external management off their backs. So you have to be the up and out person as the leader of a group, and let the followers, one at a time, be leaders of their tasks down and in. And that's what I learned on the ISS. The takeaway for an audience is that we have an enormous amount of work to do, incrementally improving the adoption of AI into human endeavor, especially when it has any kind of real-world consequence. We humans have to develop trust in our AI at a human rate. What I mean by that is humans, we can only introduce AI so fast as the humans, not understanding how it works, can accept it. And then I go right back to my space shuttle pilots never accepting autoland. The only way to build trust, and I think of AI as people. If you want to solve a problem in AI, think, well, how does a human do it? And then go right back to the AI. That's how I model it. So if you want to build trust in a human, you have to be predictable, repeatable, definitely not exciting.